Hey folks, so a few of you, quite a few of you are just joining. Just a reminder to mute your microphone. Probably want to mute your camera. If you'd like to rename yourself, you can do that by hovering over your picture and clicking on the three dots. And you can also open up the chat box by clicking on the dialogue bubble at the bottom.
I'm sure it's good.
And David, can you mute your mic? It's dangerous when you recognize somebody's voice, right? So I know that that people are still going to be trickling in, but I think we could probably start with a couple of introductions of some of the people who will have speaking roles, so to speak, during the main parts, the big group parts of the meeting. So I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen for a moment so I can see folks. I'll just start introducing myself. My name is Laura Adams, and I'm a member of Democracy Kitchen, one of the groups that's putting this workshop together. I worked for about 4 years for USAID and co-organized with Nadine a couple of federal worker rights workshops back at the beginning of this presidency. And so I will pass it on to Nadine to introduce herself.
Great, thank you, Laura, and really welcome everybody here. I won't take much time. Nadine and I work with ShutDown DC, also one of the hosts of this program, and federal employee myself. Really happy to bring this here. We will be dropping links in the chat for the federal guide that you can refer to for more information after this workshop is over, and please do share that widely. Thanks so much, Laura.
And I think just to kind of limit it, I think I would like Maddy Salzman to introduce herself because this is also her initiative.
Awesome, thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. My name is Maddy Salzman. I'm a management and programs analyst in a federal agency and also a union member and former organizer. So I'm really excited and heartened to see so many people on the line today.
All right. There are other people who will have speaking roles as well. So I think we'll probably just wait till we get to the presentations to let them introduce themselves and keep things rolling here. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at is a couple of sort of the agenda overview. I'm just going to share my screen again.
And while Laura is sharing her screen, just so people know, we're very concerned with security on this event tonight. And if you've noticed that it says live on Zoom with rev.com, it's not being broadcast anywhere. This is in fact our closed caption service. And if you would like to have closed captions, in other words, you can read it on the screen. You can click on, at least on a computer, it's in the bottom level of the Zoom screen. It says closed caption, and there's a little menu, and you can choose how you see it. So this is not being broadcasted anywhere. Just wanted to let people know. Right. Thanks.
Okay, so I wanted to go over the objectives of this workshop with everyone. We have two main objectives: to explore options for defending democracy in the federal workplace in the event that Trump attempts to steal the election. And then the second objective, very much linked to that one, is that you will leave the workshop with some next steps to prepare for different post-election scenarios and with actions and tactics that you feel comfortable employing in those scenarios. So in other words, this is somewhat of a sort of information sharing, but then also very much an action planning event. So also just to go over the group norms and expectations for behavior of participants in this workshop. First of all, what's learned in the room can leave with you, but what is said in the room stays in the room. And we are very much counting on everyone to respect each other's confidentiality. The second principle and norm is, can somebody who has their microphone on mute themselves?
Second principle and norm.
My echo. All right, so the second principle is to assume good intent from other speakers, but attend to the impact of our words on each other. A little harder to do if our cameras are muted. We'll try, do the best we can. Listen respectfully, speak for yourself, not for others. It may be tempting to try and interpret somebody else's experience or say what you think they want to say, but please just speak for yourself. And then finally, this meeting is off the record. Recording is not permitted. And we just expect everyone to, again, what's said in the room stays in the room. So then a couple of notes on your own safety and the safety of the others that you are working with tonight. Please disclose only as much information about yourself as you're comfortable with. As I mentioned earlier, feel free to keep your camera muted. Feel free to change your name when you're introducing yourself in Breakout. Use your name if you want, your agency or department if you want, or talk about what your favorite meal is. Find a way to introduce yourself that you're comfortable with. If you're talking about actions that you might take yourself, I encourage folks to speak hypothetically. If someone were considering doing X, what might the problems be? That way there's no implication that that's actually something that you've said you're going to do. Just keep things hypothetical. And then if there's a discussion emerges, especially in the breakout group, of some very specific actions that you want to take or something that might be higher risk for people in your group, definitely get each other's contact information and form a Signal group to talk about that. Signal's an app that's very secure, end-to-end encryption. It's a good way to communicate about anything that you wouldn't want to get out that might get you in trouble with your boss. So take those discussions offline. There'll be a chance at the end of the breakouts to exchange contact information with each other. Okay. So here's the agenda. How are we doing? Yes, we're already running a little late. 7:30 to 7:40, introductions, logistics. We'll have 3 speakers talking about helping to sort of define the situation we're in, activism, of the role of federal employees as activists and as defenders of democracy. And then also some of the sort of the legal questions that might be involved in your lives in the next few weeks. The breakout rooms from sorry, the slides keep jumping around, from about 8:30 to 9:10, and then we'll be sharing out with the full group. Hopefully people will have some cool ideas and tactics to share. And then we'll have some wrap up where we'll give you ways to follow up, get further resources, and so on. All right, so now we're just going to do a quick icebreaker. Essentially, we're going to do what's called a chat storm, where you type something in the chat box, but you don't hit enter until I say go. So please type in the chat box. What's one thing you hope to get out of this call? Or what's one thing you want to come away from this call with? So go ahead and type that, but don't hit enter yet. What's something that you want to get out of this workshop? Don't hit enter yet. Hold it. We'll take 10 more seconds. If you don't know how to open the chat box, it's the little dialogue bubble at the bottom of your Zoom screen. All right, are you ready? When I say go, you can hit enter. Ready, set, go. Oh, yeah. That is a real chat storm. All right, well, let me take another 10, 15 seconds. You can scroll up so you can see how much shared sentiment there is in this room. You're not going to feel alone after this workshop, that's for sure. All right, that's great. A lot of folks looking for solidarity, camaraderie, hope, protection, like-minded people, greater understanding. That's great. Thanks everybody for sharing. All right, so now we will launch into our first speaker. We will be monitoring the chat for questions. So, but we're gonna have all the speakers talk and then moderate questions. So as all of the speakers, any of the speakers talk, please feel free to type questions into the chat box at any point, and then we will address them in a bunch at the end. All right, so I gotta share my screen again. And Maddy, why don't you just go ahead and I'll get this set up.
Awesome. Can everybody hear me okay? Awesome. I saw a nod at least. Well, welcome, and it's really fun to read through the chat storm messages, and that even when we haven't influenced what each other's saying, it looks like there's a lot of things we're all trying to get in common. So I said this at the beginning, but my name is Maddy. I'm a management and programs analyst in a federal agency. I'm also a union member. I've seen some people express that they are not in unions, or that might be something not at their agency, and you'll have plenty of time to talk about that as well. I'm really heartened to see so many people join us this evening and taking time out of your personal calendar to do this, because I think there's a ton of stuff going on worth talking about. Just a couple of items. I use she, her pronouns, and of course, in case there was any question, I am not here in any official professional capacity. And so I just wanted to set up really quickly at the beginning and speak through what's happening right now and make sure we're all kind of level set. So we can go to the next slide. So the high level issue, the election is at risk. This is due to a number of factors. Donald Trump has not committed to a peaceful transfer of power. Instead, there's been significant fear mongering about risks associated with mail-in ballots, which has been rampant. The election results are unlikely to be finalized on November 3rd, which is perhaps different than what we're used to in previous years. There will likely be disagreements about which ballots should be thrown away and for what reason. We've seen lots of court cases happening in this in many swing states around the country, and there's a chance that certain decisions around the election will take place in the courts. So there's a lot going on right now, and as we're all aware, the election is now less than a week away. So next slide. So I wanted to pull out a few quotes of what Donald Trump has said on the election. I think it's important to listen to what these leaders are actually saying and to take them seriously. One of the biggest risks I think we have is to assume people are joking or speaking in a way that is not serious for them. But we saw in September, Donald Trump saying that he's complaining about the ballots are a disaster, get rid of the ballots and you'll have a very peaceful, there won't be a transfer, frankly, there will be a continuation. And if it's a fair election, he's on board. But if he sees that ballots are being manipulated, I can't go along with that, and that means you have a fraudulent election. And this is really just setting up the ideas around, well, who is saying ballots are manipulated and in what ways? And there's a quote that maybe one of the next speakers will talk about where when an authoritarian says something, you should believe them. And I think that's important here. Next slide. So all of that being said, democracy needs defense. We must protect democracy because it's something that can easily go away if we do nothing to protect it. More other speakers will talk about that. But if election officials stop counting votes, or if a winner is declared regardless of votes, or if someone stays in power that didn't win, it's a coup. If these principles are violated, our democracy is under attack. And I think it's really important that we use language that is fitting for what is potentially going on. There's a lot of indicators and things we should be paying attention to. And I think it's important to also consider that a coup can happen anywhere where there is democracy if we're not paying attention and doing what we have to do to defend it. Next slide. So speaking of coups, I also want to be upfront that it is a coup to refuse to honor the results of a free and fair election. It is not a coup to act against a government or officials who are trying to prevent a legitimate transfer of power. We believe that every vote must count, we must count every vote, and we must take action to protect democracy. Thwarting a coup is not the same thing as a coup, it's protecting democracy. There's going to be a lot of narratives around what is happening, what should be happening, what do things mean, and I think it's really important to be centered in what any of us know is right. Next slide. So I know that's a lot up front, but really important to make sure we're on the same page on. So I want to also briefly go over what are some things that can be done. Next slide. So I want to really elevate this conversation. We have power and responsibility as federal workers. There's over 4 million civilian workers, contractors, and other types of staff and personnel touching every segment of the US economy with essential and important services. We're in roles of power, we set and enforce rules, we hold people accountable to social norms. Other speakers will talk about this, but rules have meaning because we decide they do. We decide to enforce them, and it's important to pay attention to what those are. You know, I think there's a lot of space where the rest of the country looks to people like us in roles of kind of the norm to look at what is normal and allowable, and we can help shape a public opinion on what is right. And I think it's also important to mention that we carry out governmental priorities and swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And I think that is a really important place to center ourselves. That is who we, or what we swear to defend. Next slide. So I will not go into all of these. There's plenty of time to discuss these, but there's many tools in the toolbox. And that's one of the things I really want to convey here. There's lots of things that can be done. And I know in situations like this that feel really scary and huge, it can feel really paralyzing, but there are tons of actions we can take, and especially ones that we can take together. So we'll have plenty more time to dive into these, and we'll hand out the slides later, but I want to make sure people have space to learn about what you can do. Next slide. One thing I want to touch on, so does the Hatch Act apply here? I have gotten some help from folks, other colleagues on these issues. It's important to note that the Hatch Act applies to partisan activities and that protecting democracy is nonpartisan. We have freedom of expression and assembly, and these rights are not banned by the Hatch Act. We'll talk much more about this later, but wanted to make that point. Next slide. There's also information about the executives. I do want to note, of course, those are things that are scaring people now. Again, we'll have more to talk about that. But right now, those are stages. So I think it's important to recognize that if you're being asked to do things sooner than states in the executive order, ask for it in writing and slow walk what you can. We'll talk more about that. Next slide. Okay, so again, won't dive into all of these, but one important aspect is to think about what are the tactics you should take depending on your role. There's different types of roles in the federal government, and that means that there's different roles that could be appropriate for you to take. And that's something that I think can be lost in some of these conversations, so really important to do some self-reflection on. Next slide. We know that there's lots of ideas for organizing. Some items I wanted to highlight. We should continue conversations on direct action and how we can stand in solidarity with others, and especially protesting and other communities. See if you can recruit friends and allies like civil rights groups, unions, and religious organizations to work in coalition. I think if you can take November 3rd or 4th off of work, many of us have extra use it or lose it time and put it towards democracy. I know if that's somebody jumping in, but there's also lots of other options. We could look towards union participation, and you can email fedsfordemocracy@gmail.com to stay informed and help organize. And somebody asked, what can we do on November 4th? We'll have more information about that coming up, but there are lots of events happening in DC and throughout the rest of the country already. Next slide. All right, so we will spend more time talking about what can happen on November 3rd and 4th. But I think one thing that's important that I'll just mention now is, there's things we can't do on our work hours, but taking leave means you are not on your work hours. Taking leave gives you the flexibility and the possibility to be involved in other activities that are going on. But with that, I'll pass it back to Laura.
Well, and I'll just pass it on to Maria Stephan, our next speaker. And don't forget to introduce yourself, Maria.
Great, will do. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. Well, thanks, Laura and Maddy, and hi, everyone. It is really great to be with you all in solidarity during this critical junction for our country. By way of brief background, I've spent the past 2 decades focused on what Representative John Lewis referred to as good trouble, notably how people can use nonviolent action or people power to advance rights, freedoms, and democracy. I have studied as an academic and as a researcher dynamics of authoritarianism, how authoritarians around the world have attempted to steal elections. And I've also focused on when and why movements for democracy have succeeded. At the same time, I have worked in the US government. I worked in the State Department for over 5 years, and I'm currently now on a leave of absence from my job to focus on our domestic democracy and peace building work. So I'm going to be bringing to bear perspectives both as an academic and as someone who has served as a public servant in US government. And just to drive a finer point on the framing for this workshop, this is not really a training in activism. Really, it's about how you all as federal workers can be the penultimate public servants at a time when our country needs you the most. And this workshop was open to everyone, no matter their political stripe, because ultimately this is not about Trump or about Biden. It's about us, and it's about our constitutional right to choose our elected government representatives freely, without threats, without interference, or without other tomfoolery. And, we have it in us to ensure that the outcome of the election is decided by voters, and we have it in us to protect the integrity of our democratic institutions. So we have the power. And speaking of power, Laura, if you can switch to the next slide. I want to start with this quote by Gene Sharp, who's one of the pioneers in the field of nonviolent action, just to get a little bit at what power you all have as individuals and as federal workers. So Gene Sharp said in The Politics of Nonviolent Action, by themselves, rulers cannot collect taxes, enforce repressive laws and regulations, keep trains running on time, prepare national budgets, direct traffic, manage ports, print money, repair roads, keep markets supplied with food, make steel, build rockets, train the police and the army, issue postage stamps, or even milk a cow. People provide these services to the ruler through a variety of organizations and institutions. If people would stop providing these skills, the ruler could not rule. And just as an added insight on this, specifically focused on bureaucrats, President Harry S. Truman famously said, "I thought I was the president, but when it comes to these bureaucrats, I can't do a damn thing." So the bottom line with this is that we all, as ordinary people and as federal workers, have power. Next slide, Laura. So just to share a little bit, kind of one of the underlying theories of power that is kind of at the base of understanding civic action and why kind of people power has succeeded here and around the world. So the idea is that power ultimately flows from individuals and ordinary people, that no ruler or government can wield power without the consent and the cooperation of the ruled. So power is actually dispersed across society and concentrated in what we refer to as pillars of support. So these are organizations and institutions that provide a government or other power holder with the power, with the skills, the knowledge, the labor, the know-how that they need to stay in power. And these pillars of support are made up of ordinary people like you and me, who provide expertise, who provide specific forms of labor, who provide buying power. So if people in these pillars of support withhold or deny their consent and cooperation, meaning they stop obeying, they stop cooperating, and they engage in protests, boycotts, strikes, a whole host of other nonviolent tactics, that if masses of people engage in non-cooperation, no ruler can stay in power, even if they really want to, and even if they use a lot of repression. And ultimately, this is how civil resistance has removed even dictators from power in places like the Philippines, Serbia, Ukraine, Sudan, other places around the world. And the other idea is that within these pillars of support, you can think of it as kind of a series of concentric rings. And, you know, at the center is kind of the power holder, and people who are, you know, in the rings around the power holder have varying degrees of loyalty to the center. So, you know, those who are maybe closer to the center, and this uses the example of, you know, the military kind of starting with generals and going out colonels, foot soldiers, but you can think about this in terms of the bureaucracy as well, kind of going through the different hierarchy, that the people who are maybe closest to the center are more likely to obey, less likely to challenge authority. But as you go out to those outer rings, people are going to have less loyalty to the center, to the power holder. And these people are really key allies. And ultimately, you know, the goal in effective people power is to bring people over to your side, to get them to shift loyalties, to get them to move from the center to the outside. And as we know, and as Maddy, laid out so nicely, bureaucracy is a really powerful pillar. And, you know, federal workers have unparalleled familiarity with the bureaucratic process. They know how to speed things up. They know how to slow them down. They have access to critical information about policies that are being considered and implemented. They can participate in internal decision-making. They can provide or deny knowledge and expertise that those at the top of the bureaucratic totem pole need, essentially. So moving on to the next slide. So the important thing, and Maddy began to address this in her remarks, there are a number of different courses of action for federal workers who are either asked to participate in actions that they believe to be illegal or that they believe to be fundamentally unethical or contrary to a democracy. But ultimately, while there are these many different options, it ultimately comes down to individual decisions and personal choice. Deciding what to do or what not to do is a very personal decision. It's based on context. It's based on your rank, on your tolerance for risk, on your preparation, and frankly, where you sit in the federal bureaucracy. So to the next slide. Just to lay out in the field of nonviolent action, when we're talking about the range of different tactics, we talk about acts of commission and acts of omission. So acts of commission are things that you do that you either are not expected to do or that are contrary to, what the opponent, in this case, the enemies of democracy, want you to do. So in this case, an act of commission would be, as federal workers, asking very specific questions, exerting your voice in the workplace, joining with colleagues to make the case for why something may be illegal or unethical. Another act of commission is the wearing of symbols, which seems like a small or a minor thing, but it's actually really powerful when lots of people are showing unity and solidarity by wearing symbols. Symbols can be nonpartisan, they can be pro-democracy, and part of me thinks that symbols may be an important way for feds to show support and solidarity around democracy and the integrity of our election or after November 3rd. Another act of commission is creating a paper trail. So producing a very clearly written account of the problem in question and the actions that are taken to address it. And this is really, I think, in this moment where there may be uncertainty, conflicting messaging, potentially illegal orders, for civil servants, federal workers to engage in meticulous documentation to challenge the policies or the directives that they deem unethical or unconstitutional, particularly when the orders are given verbally rather than in written form. And another act of commission, albeit highly risky, and there are a number of great downsides, is leaking. So leaking information about pending or actual policies with journalists, with activists, influential people on the outside. But this, really should be used very judiciously, only on truly significant matters, because most disclosures outside of formal internal whistleblowing are at minimum a violation of contractual duty, and they may put leakers at significant legal risk. And of course, if information is classified, employees can be fired or criminally prosecuted, as Sarah may talk a little bit about. So another act of commission is creating parallel structures or self-organizing units. So organizing in the office place, in the workplace. This is particularly important in the event of abuses of power, unethical activity, to be able to self-organize, make decisions without obeying or legitimizing certain decisions that are made. So in terms of acts of omission, meaning things that you don't do, that you're expected to do, or that you're being asked to do, first is, rejecting loyalty oaths, being called upon to swear a loyalty oath, around a candidate, an individual, particularly when the outcome of the election is still in doubt, very important thing, and to foster frank internal debate and transparency with outside stakeholders whenever possible. Another act of omission is going slow or slow down. So basically people, bureaucrats, federal workers performing their duties at a foot dragging pace, which is less likely to attract attention than an overt strike, and has been used in a number of different cases. And then, another higher risk effort would be a labor strike or a walkout, would likely be illegal, but it's kind of a high risk, high impact, a nonviolent action that federal workers can take if they deem it necessary. So my last set of remarks is around the importance of an inside-outside strategy. So next slide, Laura. And really, Maddy hit on a number of these points, and so I'll just reiterate. Being able to think about what you can do as federal workers and seeing the relationship between those actions and what is happening outside the federal workplace. So really the importance of self-organizing with colleagues from within the same bureau and across government agencies, which can help build trust and confidence as federal workers are having to navigate really really difficult terrain together, connecting with civic groups and organizations on the outside and having frank and honest conversations with them. And when you think about it, the legal support and advocacy work of civil society organizations could come in really in handy, if and when you have to take certain actions on the inside. And then, contributing as private citizens, knowledge, skills, expertise to civic groups, organizations that would benefit from them tremendously. And just remaining in communication with those groups that, in a grassroots way or organizing, preparing people in the event that there is a stolen election, learn what they're doing. So I listed a few different organizations and initiatives there, just to be in the know and to be in communication, because the communication is going to be so critically important. And my last and final point is returning to a point I mentioned earlier, is just, exhibiting the utmost integrity and professionalism during this period and being the ultimate public servant while using your First Amendment rights to protect the integrity of our election and really to uphold our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Let me just remind folks, there's actually a super interesting conversation going on in chat. So if you don't have your chat window open, you're missing it. Click on the little speech bubble at the bottom of your screen. Also, don't forget, if you have questions, you can put them in chat, and the facilitators are going to keep track of questions for after the next speaker, who is Sarah Starrett. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Laura and Maria. That was really excellent. Thank you so much for that presentation. I have to say, as an attorney in the federal government, I am finding the chat suggestions very interesting, and I just do want to remind people that we lose our status as federal employees if we strike. But as my sister Sarah Harper pointed out, we could do an informational picket at lunchtime. So there are things you can do that will get you visibility. If you do them carefully and you do them at lunchtime, you probably won't get fired. So that would be my sort of initial thing, is probably don't get fired like right away, unless you're ready to quit your job. If you're ready to quit your job, that's a whole nother thing. So can everyone see me and hear me? I can't see myself, so I don't know.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. All right, so I just want to go through some real quick do's and don'ts. I am an attorney, but I am not your attorney. This is not legal advice. Do not say, Sarah told me to do this, so it was okay. All right, I will deny that I ever said it. So just be aware, those of you who know me already, you should always get legal advice if you're going to take a risky action. And you can probably talk to a union or a whistleblower agency or a private lawyer, get some ideas maybe from Nadine or Laura, just run it by somebody before you do anything that's going to get you fired. At least at this point in time, I'm feeling very vulnerable as a federal worker, so I just really don't want to get us all fired like, the first day. Okay, so here's some do's and don'ts. Can you go to the next slide, Laura? Our oath is to the Constitution. Not to any individual, not to a politician, not to a political appointee, not even to an SES or a manager. We still have the First Amendment, so we have the right to free speech. We have the right to assemble. We have the right to petition our Congress people. In many of our agencies, we also have an inspector general. We have an ethics office. We have whistleblower people that we could go to if we feel the need to blow the whistle. There are legal ways, to speak in a formal way. But at least as a general rule, we have the right to do political action outside the workplace, just like we're doing right now. We can do and say pretty much anything we want, but we can't do it on federal property, during working hours, using government equipment. Okay, so that's really probably the most important thing. I've been doing a lot of voter protection, election protection hotline volunteer activity in the last month or so. And if I'm doing it for a nonpartisan civil rights group like the Lawyers Committee, then I can get leave to do it and I can still get paid. I can do it as a pro bono activity for the federal government. But if I'm working for the Biden campaign doing the exact same thing, I cannot, because that is partisan political activity. So that's really what the Hatch Act does, is it sets up a very bright line between partisan political activity, which you cannot do in the workplace or on federal property or during duty hours, but you can do on your own time. So if you're on annual leave, for example, or after work. So the most important thing is do not use federal property, equipment, or time to advocate for or against passage of, and these are specific things, federal legislation, executive orders, policies, or actions. It's just not a good idea to do that on working time during working hours or in a federal building. If you're on your lunch hour and you want to go across the street and call your congressman using your personal cell phone, or if you want to contact a whistleblower, or public interest group, or send an email or sign a petition or do anything that you want to do that you think is important to do, you could do it on your lunch hour. You could do it before or after work, but not while you're getting paid by the federal government. Most feds, and not all feds, there may be some people in this meeting that can't do this because you're in a special category, but if you're national security or armed services or whoever, you know who you are. Most of us are allowed to engage in most partisan political activity. We cannot fundraise. That's really probably the most critical thing. But you can generally advocate for or against Biden being elected, and say that you think that Biden would be a much better candidate, and call all your friends and tell them to vote for Biden. You can do all of those things as long as you're not on working time. You can also advocate for democracy. And again, this is sort of a generic thing. You can say while you're on the clock, that votes should be counted, that the First Amendment is important, that we believe in the Constitution. You can say all those things. You can't really say, Donald Trump is a terrible president, I hate him, and he should be, thrown out on his butt. You cannot say that. Although some of us want to. We can't. We also can't do what Ivanka does, and we can't do what Kellyanne does, and we can't do what the president does, which is use federal property for political campaign activities. We cannot do that as federal employees, or we can get fired. But next slide. One of the things we can do is we can advocate for or against executive orders, policies, or actions. So for example, in my own job, I write federal regulations. I work on teams of people that do federal regulations. And at the same time, I might get an email from a group, a public interest group saying, contact this federal agency and tell them don't do these things. So on my working time, I'm drafting the regulation, but in my free time, I can say that I think it's a terrible idea. And I can also contact my Congress people and tell them, to stop my agency from issuing this terrible policy or this terrible rule. The same rules apply on social media, just as a general policy. You can tweet, you can do Facebook, you can go on Zoom, do what we're doing now. But you just really can't use your federal title or representing your agency. So I can't come on here saying, my name is Sarah, I work for the Department of X, and as a lawyer for the government, I am advising you, this and that and the other. That is the job of the secretary that I work for. He can do that, but I cannot speak for the government. And just the most important thing is if you break these rules, you can get disciplined, you can get fired. If you engage in civil disobedience during working hours on the job at federal property, that is extremely bad for your career. So I just advise you don't do that. Don't strike, don't engage in any activity that can be considered a strike. However, again, leafleting at lunchtime in front of the building, that's perfectly fine. So you should talk to your union if you have one. You should talk to your ethics office, which I think almost all federal agencies have one. You can contact a lawyer for free. We have some resources in a document that's being circulated of a number of people, whistleblower groups and federal attorneys and other people out there that are happy to give you advice on taking certain actions and what the risks or rewards might be. The only other thing I want to say in terms of the go slow approach is, in my experience, when we had the last transition in the last 3 months after the election was over and before the new president took office, there was an enormous amount of work that was done on an incredibly fast pace in my agency to try and get things out, to get regulations out, to get guidance documents out, to finish policies, to try to put things in stone so that the new administration could not change them back. And that's an area where, in the legal department where I work, sometimes corners were cut, which is just really, really bad. And sometimes we got sued over those things, and very often those actions got overturned. So it's perfectly okay to say to your boss, I think this needs some more work. I think this needs some more thought, drafting memos, circulating questions, raising issues. Because even if some terrible things happen in the next 3 months, there may be a new administration and a new Congress that may try to reverse some of these actions. So if we do have a good paper trail, it really helps. It helps a lot. And that's all I was really going to say. I think we're going to take questions a little bit later, and we're going to do a breakout room so we'll have a chance to discuss some of these ideas.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Nadine to field some of the questions from the chat. Feel free to keep entering questions in the chat.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much to Maddy and Maria and Sarah for these really great presentations to jumpstart our work tonight. I have been collecting some of the questions that I saw. Feel free to continue to add in the chat. So one of the first ones I saw was, can you speak to potential retaliation from political appointees, even if informal, leaving off of calls, etc.? I know there are a lot of USAID people on here afraid of speaking up or doing anything at all, even something like an email signature, because of political leadership in bureaus and in the agency right now. I don't know if it sounds like it's a Sarah question, but.
Well, I'm just going to say it certainly happens. And if you're afraid of that, then don't do it. I mean, you can toe the party line and that is your choice, or you can make your voice heard to some extent, and that is also your choice. It's not going to be great for your career to go up against an SES. There's no way around that. It is what it is.
Yeah. And you may want to develop some other options for your career if this is an issue, because there are other things to do. So here's some others. There were a bunch of questions about lunch break, and it's particularly in this moment when we're teleworking. So, if you're teleworking, can you do these things on your lunch hour? What are the legal consequences of doing things on one's lunch break if you're working from home? Things like that.
Your lunch hour is yours, and it's weird when you're in your own home, because your own home is sort of become a government workplace. But as a practical matter, I just kind of get up and I walk in the other room. And for example, I have my government computer sitting here right next to me, which is closed at this moment, and I'm doing this Zoom on my personal computer. And so I'm really, really careful to which things I do on which computer. If I get an email that I don't want to answer on that computer, I just literally get up and walk to the other room. So you have to just kind of manage it for yourself. If you're being monitored and your supervisor is harassing you, you just need to be really careful, because if they want to try to get rid of you, they can say if you falsified your leave, or you did something you weren't supposed to do, and you have to be really careful. I mean, especially if you're going to engage in activities that are going to make people mad, be prepared. But I was just going to say, in terms of one response, you can like a tweet during your lunch hour. The First Amendment applies to you. You can like tweets. You can do things like that. You can say things are good, things are bad. Those are okay. That's not a partisan political statement. If you say Trump should lose, that is a partisan political statement. But if you say his makeup looked ugly, I think that's okay.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, especially if you're in that kind of business, I think that's a reasonable thing to say. So there are some calls for talking about the executive order, particularly the one that was just signed. So I'm wondering if Maddy or Sarah wants to continue answering, or Erica. And also, I'll just encourage people, you can ask questions of any of our three panelists at this point. So feel free to keep writing things in. So this one is about, who'd like to talk about the executive order that was just signed?
Well, I'll just say really briefly, it's terrible. It's horrible in every way, but we don't really know how broad the impact is going to be. It's going to take some time to figure out, how broadly they're going to try to attack us. We just don't know yet. But if you have a union in your workplace, you should be talking to them already about what jobs you have and what jobs are at risk.
Yeah.
And NTU has already filed a lawsuit.
Yeah. So there's lawsuits going on. I think that's great. I'm definitely not an expert in this executive order. There's other people that have a lot more baseline knowledge than I do, but I'll just add that if you look at the language, the executive order calls for a list of recommended positions for becoming Schedule F employees to be delivered to OMB by January 19th, and it's just a preliminary list. So my general thought is I don't think it is relevant if the president remains the official president on January 20th. I think a world where that isn't happening, I don't think it's relevant. So I, again, not an expert personally, but that's my read of the executive order.
Great. Thank you very much for that. And there's been a little conversation going on here, for example, about Black Lives Matter and how that is an example of a nonpartisan political statement. I guess that's been previously litigated. So this is great. There was a question a little while back about trustworthiness. There was a question about how trustworthy are our unions and how trustworthy are ethics offices. I don't know if anybody wants to take that one on. Any thoughts or comments about that?
I would just say you have to make a judgment. You know, if you want to have a confidential conversation, you should call an attorney and ask for a consultation, and that will be confidential. If you want to, you know, if you don't trust somebody, then you should not probably talk to them.
Yeah, this is true. Great. So there's a question about regarding civil disobedience and getting peacefully arrested on my own time. Is this a danger to my job? Anybody want to address that one?
My sense is it probably is, but Sarah can offer probably a better answer to that.
Well, if you're fundraising for a political campaign, then yes, clearly that's a violation. But if you're talking about like making phone calls for Biden,
no, civil disobedience, meaning going out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you can be fired if you are arrested, you know, and if you're convicted of a crime. So, for example, if you blockade a federal building, that's a federal crime, and you can be fired for committing such a crime. You know, that is certainly possible. It's not guaranteed, but it's, and they can also search your desk, and they can search your computer, and you can be subject to some serious harassment.
So maybe I'll jump in as a federal employee who did risk arrest, although at that point I was a contractor. My security, I never had a high-level security clearance, but I passed my low-level security clearances multiple times, and I had been at that point an activist for 30 plus years with a number of arrests that I couldn't actually calculate. So, and I was working, I will say, for NOAA. So that maybe, I don't know that I could have gotten a job in state or DOD, but that's definitely not a widespread, it's very particular, right, to the job that you're applying for and the agency that you're working in and the kind and type of arrest that you take. I would really recommend staying away from felony charges, for example, but whether or not you do a misdemeanor or an infraction on federal property or on public property really doesn't affect most of the jobs that you would be considered for, just as a sideline note.
Yeah,
okay.
As an attorney, I think we're highly, you know, that's one of the things we have to be careful about.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I'll just add that, yeah, I think probably a somewhat unsatisfying answer on some of these topics are going to be, it depends based on your role, based on your agency. I also wanted to add that, you know, even if as a starting point, if you're not sure you have colleagues that you trust to talk to, that's one of the reasons of having this conversation. We want to start having spaces for people to connect. And so maybe you'll meet somebody through this space that works at your agency that maybe has more information, or talk to somebody at a different agency who maybe has awareness of what it's like where you are. So we want to help facilitate conversation, even if you're not sure who to turn to at work.
Yeah, That's great. So I'm going to go back to another question I saw. I have a job that includes offering informed judgment on different matters and mentioning that there's a possible change of administration and we need to consider that possibility would be considered a normal part of my job. I can see some political appointees reacting badly to that, but it's not against the rules if it's framed in that context. Does anybody want to comment? There was also a comment about how people might stay away from that because political appointees would react badly. But is there anything illegal about it? Is there a problem with that? Any comments?
I don't think it's illegal. You're just raising a policy question. I mean, one of the things that we deal with all the time is, if we do this, will we get sued? Yeah. You know, who will sue us and what will be the arguments that they make? So we have to try to make sure what we do is not arbitrary and capricious. And so if we fail to consider all the aspects of a problem, it's arbitrary and capricious. You know, so that's part of the job, is just sort of calculate what's going on and react, you know, offer options anyway to react to it.
Great. Excellent. So there's a bigger question, and maybe we want to talk about that in relation to the topic of the night of World Federal Workers. About, I understand the emphasis on preparing for a scenario where Trump refuses to accept a defeat, but I'm honestly more afraid of him just outright winning. How do we prepare for that? Anybody, any one of our panelists, Maria, Maddy, Sarah, want to take this?
I'm putting my head in the sand on that one. I refuse to accept the possibility.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess, you know, as a citizen, voting is the best guarantor that Trump will not be elected. So getting out to vote and telling everyone, all your friends and family to vote, I think is the most important thing anyone can be doing at this moment.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I'll just underscore that being here tonight is a really valuable thing to do, making connections with other people who potentially are in the same agency or the same boat that you're in, one way or the other. And because one of the basic things that we do as activists and organizers and people who want to fulfill our civic duty is encourage people to work with others. It's really difficult to work alone. Not only can you only do a certain amount on your own, but you are also much more susceptible to all kinds of repression and other things. So we really do encourage people to start by researching your options, learning what they mean and understanding the risk levels and preparing to get support for those particular risk levels. And that's where the guide, the federal guide that we mentioned, it can be quite helpful for those of you who will be in the administration, no matter who is elected on Tuesday. Okay.
I think one other thing I'll just add on the subject of the president winning again, and obviously this, what I'm about to say is kind of a large gray zone, but no matter what, there's going to be an information machine saying that he has won. And I think it's really on us to be paying close attention to the facts about, have the votes been counted? Has there been halting of counting votes? Has there been inordinate numbers of votes thrown away for reasons that are unclear? You know, paying attention to all of those pieces underneath, because there's going to be people, I feel personally, there's going to be people that will say that he has won absolutely no matter what. And so being prepared to kind of look at what facts are actually happening is really important.
And I would just say this is also the importance of being in communication with and in touch with groups, civic groups, grassroots groups that are preparing people for the possibility that red lines may be crossed, that, you know, that the election goes sideways, you know, so everything from Choose Democracy to Hold the Line, to ShutDown, We Count on Us. I listed a few of those in the slides earlier, but, you know, they're the ones who are really in the vanguard of helping people think about, interpret red lines, and think about different actions that can be taken well beyond kind of street protests and demonstrations, but kind of sustained organizing and action.
Great. So we'll take a few more questions. One of the ones that I'll just point out is that there was a few comments about, are we allowed to take off on Tuesday? And certainly you are allowed to take off on Tuesday. Most offices are letting people do that. Whether or not you have to take leave is a question that's up to your supervisor. So, but it's totally legal for you to take off on Tuesday, as far as I can tell. Anybody, Sarah, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, in fact, Nadine, OPM has sent out a memo saying that they encourage all federal employees to help out at the polls in a nonpartisan capacity, and they're offering 8 hours of administrative leave for anyone who wants to do that. Clearly, if you're going to do it in a partisan capacity, you need to take annual leave, but you can also work with the civil rights groups and just do poll monitoring on a nonpartisan basis if that's what you want to do.
Great. And I will say there's been a number of questions in this chat about whether or not there'll be another meeting or whether or not there's other things happening. We will at the end highlight some things. If you are in Washington, D.C., shutdowndc.org is the place to go for information and a calendar of further trainings and also activities. If you are national, protecttheresults.org has a listing of events, and we will send more information like that around if you're interested in getting involved in other activities outside of work. So let's see. There is a bunch of other comments about whether or not you're allowed to be in a transition team. And Sarah or Maria or Maddy, would you like to comment on transition teams?
Well, I assume you mean for the Biden campaign, right? That's what you're asking. Yeah. Again, if you're a federal employee and you want to go work for the Biden campaign, you'd probably have to take leave. You'd request leave and take leave to do that work. If your agency appoints you to that, then that's fine.
Great. Excellent. Great. So are there any other questions that we should address? There's still a lot of chatter about arrests. It is really true that you need to talk to local lawyers, and in particular lawyers that are really clear about your particular agency's rules and regulations. Yeah, that's just the way it is. If you would like to be connected to local lawyers, you can let us know. We have incredibly good activist lawyers locally, but also, you can go to your agency lawyers, but there's a National Lawyers Guild, there's an excellent place to start, or the ACLU, or Law for Black Lives locally. And also, to the person who said they're a poll worker, are we allowed to get paid as poll workers, or do we have to report that income to our employers? Anybody know that?
We don't give tax advice, but if you're getting paid by the federal government on administrative leave, you can't also accept payment as a poll worker. It's one or the other.
There you go. Great. So I think maybe we should transition now, unless there's another burning question, into.
Nadine, can I just show you something real quick?
Oh, please.
I'm wearing a shirt that I think is acceptable under the hashtag Vote Like Black Lives Matter. I would wear something like this, and I think you'd be okay wearing that on the job.
Yeah. Oh, there's one more question. Let's actually take this one. I understand that it's important to refuse the quote, "let the trains run on time" for those who aren't able to strike. What would that look like in practical terms? What does it look like in practical terms to put, to slow the gears down in some ways or another?
At the Department of Labor, it takes the form of several rounds of the cost-benefit analysis for a new regulation. And when people were cheating on the numbers, a copy of that draft got leaked to the Daily Labor Report, and it got published, and it got sent to a congressperson. And the Office of Inspector General opened an investigation on who was cheating on the numbers. So again, that's sort of a combination of tactics. It's making a really good paper trail. It's making sure that that document got out to someone who could make use of it, and then Congress getting the Office of Inspector General involved. It was really a way to stop that thing just in its tracks, and it worked really well. But it was a coordinated effort by a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And Maria, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, no, and the thing about strikes, I completely agree with where Sarah was coming from. That strike is kind of the worst option. I laid it out as an option just because it's, it's there, it's available if kind of your conscience is, past the point of no return, if you will. But there are definitely a lot of different go slow tactics. And I think, this is also an area where, folks on the outside, so private citizens, those in groups on the outside, being able to show solidarity with federal workers and civil servants is particularly important during this moment. Just to tell them, like, we've got your back on the outside, do the right thing, be ethical, serve well. And I think we don't often think about that in the protest category, but like incentivizing folks doing the right thing and having that be loud and clear is, just another option.
Yeah, I'll add onto that some information that, frankly, I've learned from other people who are attending this call, that, there's obviously a history of air traffic controllers striking in the past and getting fired for that under the Reagan administration. And I think that has kind of held through as not just an actual barrier to striking, but also makes federal employees deeply fearful of action they can take. But I also, in the most recent government shutdown, I think there was a really strong relationship between the air traffic controllers, even though they did not strike at any point, the issues that they posed to the unions in the airline industry that ended up playing a huge role in helping get the government back open. So I think having those partnerships with other organizations, powerful unions in the private sector that can have our backs and vice versa will be really important.
Great. Thank you so much for everyone. For our three speakers and for folks asking really wonderful questions to extrapolate on. Right, in the notes, somebody said, Fed flu struck many TSA and air controllers, threatening to shut down airports. That is a particular thing that we could all catch this winter. Here we go. What we're going to do now is transition into another section. We're going to do some breakouts. In the chat, I am actually going to share a document that is going to be the basis for our breakout groups. We have I think 19 or so facilitators who are designed to help lead these breakouts because they're short. And we are asking folks to go into your breakout groups. We'll do a short round of intros. We're going to discuss a few scenarios. And actually, Laura, are you able to share your screen so we're going to review these scenarios just for a minute because we know people will be interested in talking about so many things. We thought we would offer 3 very specific scenarios to talk about and from our position as federal workers. And to jumpstart then the conversation about what are our options? What are potential action options? And then hopefully by the end of your breakout, you're also writing yourself a memo about your intentions, about how things that you'll take away from this conversation and what you personally can do. So these scenarios are all assuming we're in the week after the election and that there's no clear winner or that Trump is denying he lost. So the first one is that your leadership is asking staff to draft false official statements, talking points, communiques, whatever, for foreign or a domestic audience saying that Trump won, claiming that protests are violent and illegitimate, uncounted mail-in ballots are fraudulent, and the Dems are staging.
Barbara, this is not good.
So, everything all right? Okay. The second scenario that's possible to discuss, and I'd recommend you pick one in your breakouts, is that leadership in your department or agency is using the new executive order to initiate a purge of disloyal, in quotes, civil servants. You're being asked to report on the loyalty of your colleagues, to demonstrate your own loyalty, maybe you have to sign an oath, and to certify that you'll not participate in anti-Trump activities, even outside of work. All right. These scenarios, by the way, are written down in that document that I shared. The third one, political appointees are hastily cementing their legacy by pushing through bad policy, defunding projects they don't like, and funding their special interests. You suspect some of this activity is corrupt or in violation of actual federal regulations. So there's 3 scenarios that we can think about. You can pick one, or you can comment on all of them for the first few minutes of your breakout. Then we would really encourage people to transition into talking about what you can do potentially as a response. We do encourage you, if you feel like you want to continue conversations with people in your breakouts or connect with them, to share contact information however you feel fit to do, whether it's an email account or a cell number. It's really up to you. And we will hopefully call another event, as we said, some point in the future, so that people can continue conversations. But if you really are interested, please connect with folks in your breakout groups. So there are, Hope is helping us tonight. Thank you very much for that. We are in the breakout groups. We have approximately a half an hour. We will be coming back shortly around 9:15. And we really encourage folks to participate and meet your fellow attendees. Right, exactly. Number 3 is happening on a daily basis. Exactly. So you can talk to each other. Maybe you just finally got fed up and you want to talk to some people about that number 3 scenario. Welcome to the space to talk about it. All right, I think we're going to go. If I would recommend, you're all going to lose actual access to this main chat. So if you want to, whoops, that's not the thing that I was going to share with folks. If you want to, if somebody could share the link again for that document, please do, because you'll need to take it with you out of the chat, or somebody else probably in your breakout will have it and can share it with you. These breakout groups are totally random. We actually we actually have a lot of people on the call, so we've decided to do it as a complete mix-up. So thank you.
We tried to group people, and it just was impossible. There's so many of you.
I will get everyone open into the breakout rooms. Can I ask for Adam and Barbara as facilitators to not go to whatever breakout room you're assigned? I can't find what breakout room you're supposed to be going to, so I need to add you to breakout rooms. I'm opening the rooms now. You should get an invitation. But just Adam and Barbara.
Hi, guys.
Everybody.
I'm in a completely dark room because I didn't expect to be, I forgot we were doing breakouts, so there's no point in me turning my camera on because it would just be a blob. But
What time did they say that we're wrapping up again for this?
so they said this would be a half hour. So presuming that's true, I'm guessing they want us to stop at 9:15, which would give us 15 minutes to reconvene if we're supposed to wrap up at 9:30. I don't know if that was the plan or not.
Cool. Well, I'm not sure if other folks are going to be joining this breakout group, but let's just get started briefly with some introductions. So I'll be the facilitator for this session. My name's Rachel, and I'm actually not a federal employee, but I'm close friends with a bunch of people who are and coordinated this call. So I'm happy to kind of be able to guide and facilitate this conversation, but you all are going to be the ones with the ideas here. And I'm just here to kind of like make sure that we're hitting the main points we want to, take some notes, and get us on the right track. So to get started, let's just do a quick round of introductions. You can share whatever information you're comfortable with, and leave out whatever you're not comfortable with. If you don't even want to say your name, just, I don't know, like tell us your favorite like dessert or something. But I'll start. My name's Rachel. As I mentioned, I'm not in an agency. I'm not a Fed. I work on renewable energy, and I'm pretty involved in coordinating some work with ShutDown DC and a couple of other ways to defend democracy after the election. And I'll pass it on to Mr. J. And then once you've gone, you can pass it on to somebody else.
My name is Joel. I am a federal employee, but I'm not part of the executive branch. I'm one of those quasi-government things that reports directly to Congress. So in some respects, my job is maybe a little safer, but I want to learn what's going on in other agencies and how I can support. My favorite dessert is vanilla ice cream. And then we'll go to Laura Robb.
Hey guys, my name is Laura. I am also a federal contractor rather than a federal employee. I spent 3.5 years as a contractor at DHS HQ, which then became CISA, the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency. And I've recently finished that contract and I just started at FDA. So I still have connections to the Fed team that I worked with at DHS. And I now have a very large network of FDA employees. And so I'm just sort of looking to see what behaviors I can model for my Fed clients and ways that I can be supportive of them, and just sort of how can I make suggestions to anybody who expresses to me that they want to do something but don't know what that would be to be helpful. So, and I will pass it to Comrade Locke, whose name I may be mispronouncing.
That's fine. I'm Josh. It's nice to meet you all. I'm a federal employee for almost 5 years now. It's not my life. I had a career before it and will probably soon start a new one outside of the federal government. I don't know what else I should say at this point, except for that I am seeing a lot of abuse happening right now, and you know, I've gotten into a little bit of trouble myself. And my favorite dessert is those, you know, 1 pound Belgian chocolate bars at Trader Joe's.
And then do you want to pass it on to one of the other folks in the chat?
I guess to Susan.
Susan, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
If not, Susan.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, if Susan's not responding, then Molly, I guess.
I thought I heard Susan for a second. I don't want to jump on.
Looks like her sound may not be working at the moment.
Is my sound working?
Yeah, we can hear you, Molly.
Okay, all right. Well, okay, yeah, so I see Susan in the chat saying that her sound isn't working. All right. Well, I guess I'm Molly, and I've been a federal employee in a couple of different services for about 28 years, and I work in the national security community, and I tell people that my, you know, oath to the Constitution is about the only thing I've managed to be faithful to for my entire life, and you know, I am just really nervous about what's going to happen. So, and my favorite dessert is probably those weird little like mochi cakes with red bean filling.
I love those. And do you want to pass it on to somebody who hasn't spoken yet?
Okay, yeah, that's right. I see that Susan likes pumpkin pie, and she's trying to figure out her mic, and I will pass on to B in the meantime.
Thanks. Hi, guys. I am B. I use she, her pronouns. I am not currently a federal worker. However, I am in the process of searching for a new job and have been applying to a lot of federal jobs. So I figured, you know, be prepared before I get into it rather than having to figure it out afterwards. And I also do a lot of work with ShutDown DC and other groups. And because I can't be in the streets right now, I was injured at a protest about 2 months ago. So my job right now in all of my different organizations is collecting information and disseminating it to people who need it. So I also wanted to come here and just kind of get a sense of you know, how I can help the people that are my contacts who are also federal workers who couldn't be here tonight. And my favorite dessert is anything I get to make myself, because I used to be a pastry chef. And I'll pass it to, has Mr. J gone? Or am I the last one?
Amy might be the only person who hasn't gone.
Amy, okay. All right, I will pass it to Amy.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Amy. I work I am a federal employee and have only been in Fed for the last 18 months or so, and have, had some conversations with my other coworkers, expressing some concern about what's going to happen next week. So wanted to come here today in part to be a conduit for information, kind of along the lines of also just sort of channel some of my nervous energy around everything.
Cool. Susan, if your mic does work, feel free to just chime in if you want to introduce yourself. I noticed I forgot to say my favorite dessert. If you've ever been to Bow Tie, they have this fantastic sticky rice, mango sticky rice. I love it. It's definitely up there for me. So the next thing that we're going to be doing is discussing some scenarios. So I am going to drop them in the chat right now. I don't know if you guys got this. I dropped the agenda in the chat, and then this is also a portion of it where we're going to observe some of the scenarios. And again, like I said, I'm not a Fed. I don't work for the government, so I'm mostly just here to facilitate y'all's conversation and gather your ideas. And I just put them in there. So if you want to take a look at number 1, we can then discuss different things around that. So I'll just read that out loud. Your leadership is asking staff to draft false official statements, talking points, communiques, etc., for a foreign domestic audience, saying that Trump won, claiming that protests are violent and illegitimate, uncounted mail-in ballots are fraudulent, and that the Democrats are staging a coup. So that's scenario number 1. So given this, let's talk about what actions and decisions are in your immediate sphere of influence as somebody who works in the government. And I'll take some notes. Just let me know if my typing is too loud. Yeah.
I just recommend everyone who works in the federal government, if you read the mainstream press, like who is covering your agency, who is working for ProPublica, who is working for Politico. They all have Signal accounts. Text them, leak everything you can, save your emails, I record these meetings, I send it over. And I can't believe I'm showing my face here, but I've been doing this for months. And if you do have to write something with really crappy, just unintelligible, ungrammatical language to just make them look terrible. And it will look like something that comes from this administration anyway, but.
And to your first point, I know we talked a little bit about whistleblower protections. Do you have any sense of like what is and isn't covered when you're kind of like leaking things to a place like ProPublica over Signal or anything like that?
I mean, again, and I sort of prefaced it, I was like, I don't anticipate keeping my job for too long. So I'm just taking a risk, and I just believe in it, and I don't really care about the job anymore, which is terrible because I don't know what I'm going to do without it. But I just figure I'll get another job.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely an important thing to think about, like your own risk level. And if you're in a place where you're like, so be it, and taking that level of risk is.
The other thing is, not everyone's in that position like me where I feel confident about like going back on the hunt for a new job. You may have a colleague though who has a higher risk threshold than you do. So if there's a way that you can pass on that information and that they're willing to be the front for it. Again, the journalists I've dealt with have been super ethical in ways to shield me.
Okay.
Seeming to be the source of the leaks. So just get to find out who those, and most respectable journalists do that. They try and shield their sources because that's their bread and butter, that they give them the stories, so they don't want to throw you under the bus or screw you.
Yeah.
So this is Laura. I am known in my organization for being the one who is annoying about thinking through all the nitty-gritty details. So I'm going to do that right now. I know that in most fairly large operations, not everyone is tasked with drafting false official statements, right? So it's entirely possible that the 8 people in this room, that none of us are actually drafting statements that would be coming from our agency. So, to thinking about each of us and like, where exactly would this scenario intersect with us, right? It might be, for example, that the external affairs office for your agency, who you don't really have any control over, is the group that actually puts out that statement. And so what can you do before, during, and after that process, right? Do you have a connection to someone in EO or EA where you can go up to them and say, hey, have you been asked to draft a statement like this? If they say yes, how would you convince them to not do it? And if they don't agree with you and someone in that office goes ahead and issues a statement anyway, how would you be able to exercise your First Amendment rights to say, like, I work at this agency, this statement was put out in support of the coup, this is a coup, and I do not support my agency's statement? Would you make that statement to the public? Would you make it internally to your supervisor? Like, where exactly do you intersect with this talking point communique?
Yeah, I think a lot of us are called on to provide building blocks for, say, talking points. So, for example, you might be in a part of your agency that doesn't really deal with the press or, the public particularly, but then the head of your, stovepipe needs talking points or something to be able to, give a presentation on, say, like the glorious, harvests under Comrade President or, whatever. So, insisting on true information, I think, is really valuable. But honestly, the opportunity to put something together and then, weigh in on clearances and things is just a really great way of gumming up the works, because, you put forward information that, will be rejected because it's accurate. But then, I really think that the Bureau of Crop Dusting needs to take a look at this. Or, well, I can't send this in until I am sure that so-and-so has seen it and agrees. Or, don't you think the lawyers need to be involved? Because, and you can, gum stuff up for days or at least really irritate some people. But
or like really making bureaucracy your friend.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to agree, especially with that part about pushing things before the general counsel offices, because they've been my best friends of slowing things down for some weeks, sometimes months. Lawyers.
Smart. I want to see if we can move on to the next question that's provided, which it says, in the week or so after the election, in this scenario where, well, actually, looks like it's asking us to continue focusing on the scenarios. So we can take a look at, do we want to continue talking about scenario number 1? I think we got some pretty solid points, and I'll definitely share those notes with the group. But the second scenario that we have is leadership in your department or agency is using the new executive order to initiate a purge of disloyal civil servants. You're being asked to report on the loyalty of your colleagues and to demonstrate your own loyalty by signing an oath of loyalty to President Trump and certify that you will not participate in anti-Trump activities, even outside of work. Thoughts?
Don't do that.
That would be answered with my resignation letter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would make them fire me first, because, you know, that's not cause for termination. Make them work for it if they want it, you know.
This would never happen to me.
Right, same here.
They would get rid of them. I would be the first one out.
No, but I think
that would never happen in my organization, but
I think making them work for it is really a good point, though.
yeah.
I mean,
Oh,
because
I'm not going to sign that. Fire me.
Can you
And then
imagine
court
if
and
they
then-
had to start initiating firing action against all that many people? I mean, HR would melt.
I also think that's a great time to take your user lose and forget to answer your email. Like, they can't do anything for the duration of time in which you are simply on your PTO. And then when you get back, then you have to respond to that email, and you can push that process out weeks.
Can you ignore the email altogether? Just like ignore or not sign it? I don't know if that falls into a sphere of.
I accidentally deleted it. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, like ignore it. Somebody approaches you 3 months later, is like, where's that thing? It's like, oh,
What thing?
must have wound up in my spam folder.
I thought that was a hoax. Are you
Right.
sure that was real?
That was a phishing
That was
test.
real?
That was a phishing test, right?
Yeah, exactly. Treat that, report it to spam and see what happens.
Yeah, let IT deal with it. Oh, I am.
Oh, I do, a really important point that I heard, which in my limited knowledge of things, is that federal employees do have a fairly well protected employment status, especially if they're in a union. It does take a lot to fire a Fed. So I think whoever said make them work for your firing and like gumming up the HR portion of this, yeah, like again, using bureaucracy to your advantage and like making it a total headache seems like a good approach rather than outright resigning and not making them work for, you know, not giving them the headache of having to go through a firing process.
I think some of my concern with just cutting off is the executive order, that I think there's a decent chance that I would be flipped into a status where I would lose a lot of those protections. And I think I would rather protest and resign and then contact the media and my congressman.
Well, there's still some time before that EO is cemented, because of the legal challenges in place that are already happening. So you're not alone in that feeling, but there are people fighting for you. So, and nothing's going to happen until January. I think it goes into effect then. We have about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I noticed that we have 10 minutes. So we have like an intention setting, what we want to see in the next couple of weeks we can do, or we can chat through the last scenario. I don't know if you guys are having fun with the scenarios and want to do that, but I think we do have time for both. But if you guys want to skip over to the like the short-term outcomes, long-term goals portion, we can do that. Anyone have a preference?
I would skip ahead.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
I'm okay with that.
I am going to drop this question in the chat. It says, in the week or so after the election, what are a couple short-term outcomes for your own action that you want to focus on? And then it gives you some examples. And I know the situation is going to be different for everyone based on your status and the level of risk you want to take. But we can kind of popcorn around and share our goals and ideas.
So as I said, I'm a contractor, but I asked my CEO very publicly in July what line she was willing to state that we would not cross that was, or I forget what month it was. That was the month in which the Pact and Operation Legend task forces were deployed. And given that DHS is one of our clients, I wanted to know quite explicitly if I'm an employee of this company and I go to a protest and the person standing from across from me is one of our clients. Like, are you, as my CEO, going to stand with me and protect me? Or like, if that person shoots me in the face with a rubber bullet, like, how are you, like, I want you to be thinking about this because it's a very possible scenario on November 4th, and like, let's talk about it. And she was really resistant to making a public declaration of what her line was. It was not a conversation that went particularly well, but I did ask it publicly. And I am very prepared to ask that publicly again. Like, what is the line that you would not tolerate being crossed? And can you say that, and can you put it in writing? That's what I'm planning to do most immediately, if it looks like anything is going badly awry.
That's really smart, and I think we often overlook the fact that there's so many contractors in the federal government, and they are employed by private companies. Those private companies have a choice about what action they want to take and what they want to follow, and if their client is like essentially acting illegally, like being like, well, this is our line in the sand. And it sounds like it was unfortunate that your CEO was resistant, but the more we ask this stuff publicly of them, like the more exposure we bring to the issues. Anyone else have thoughts on their short-term goals?
I think making sure that we're naming what is happening as a coup in different language and communications with coworkers will be really important.
Yeah. Totally agreed. In the ShutDown BC conversations that I've been having, and that's not on the federal side, we also are often saying, like, call it a coup, it's a coup. Don't let anyone tell you it's not. Because the more you normalize that language, the more like it becomes apparent. And it's like most centrist folks in the government might start actually accepting that.
Yeah, and I think, I work on a project where I'm interacting on a daily basis with our politicals and starting to call into question, if we're in the midst of a coup, should we even be listening to our politicals because they are not here legitimately anymore?
That's a great question to be asking.
That said, I know that, if there's a Biden win next week, there's going to be a transition team coming in, and I think I'm going to be spending a lot of time working with them, because I know, and I was around during the last transition, like, we spent a lot of time preparing those briefing books, and we are not doing that this time. That is not a priority. And so a lot of that work is going to have to be done sometime. I mean, the last time we spent about 6 months preparing a big fat briefing book. That's going to all have to start. All that work's going to probably happen next week. Not that there was that much achieved policy-wise these last 4 years, but I don't know if it's naive to say, but I'm going to kind of I'm going to have to shut out the current political appointees and go to the transition team and be like, this is, I'm looking ahead to the future. This is our work. So, I hate to think that they're going to be our saviors or something, but.
Can I ask another nitty-gritty question related to that? So say you have two narratives happening simultaneously. There's the existing Trump appointees saying there is no transition team because there's no transition, it's a continuation. Then you have Trump's side, or Biden's side, saying, I won and my team is coming to the doors. Like, what are the responsibilities of the various people in your agency to issue a visitor badge and physically let someone into the building and give them IT access and set up the meeting?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, like, yes, they do need computers and stuff, but like right now there are no doors. Like, how do you get them the Zoom logins, or how do you start,
We can make those determinations ourselves. They say you're going to use your email account, and we're going to start, and we're like, I don't know, we're like the Lithuanian government in exile or something. we're gonna start working with them.
Yeah, and I think it's almost like definitely a risk factor, but if there's a contested election and it's fairly clear to us who won, we get to choose who the leader is. And I don't know what risk that puts on you, and I'm not a Fed again, so I don't want to like put you in a weird situation, but like I think that is a point where you and your team and your supervisors and those non-appointee, like I'm sorry, what's the term? Career staff can actually decide like, well, according to our understanding, Biden won, and therefore we are listening to his appointees and his transition team. And that's obviously going to be on your thoughts there. It looks like our breakout room is going to be closing really soon.
And I'll also go back to, we took an oath to the Constitution and to uphold it, and that is the one thing that we can always fall back on.
I would also say we should check with the Partnership for Public Service, because our agencies are not preparing us for a transition. This is not normal. It didn't happen last time. And they probably know how this is gonna, maybe they're gonna have some guidance.
And I know we're about to be kicked out of here. I did take some notes. Is there a best way I can send this? I just tried to send it in the chat and it is being not great. But overall, I think the discussion was more important than the notes I was taking. I'll try to see if I can message them over to you individually in the big group. It's great chatting with you all.
Like,
hi, thank you, host. Thank you, Hope. I'm back too. I think I'm gonna, once everybody's back, you can let me know. All right, so we are, thanks everybody for participating in the breakout groups. Hope you had some very interesting conversations about the scenarios and or about the conditions that you're all working in and ideas about what we might do in the week following the election. So we will, we'll drop the link to the guide that is part of this workshop in the chat again. And we will also be able to send you lots of follow-up information. In the guide itself, there's a whole section on all kinds of things that you'll find helpful in action planning and other things. So love to take a moment to hear from some of the 18 or so breakout groups that we had. So if anybody came up with an action idea or a thought about what people could do, some of the critical things people can do in this upcoming week, love to see folks raise their hand or put in the chat that you'd like to share. And also you could write something in the chat as well. I see Tim is willing to give us some information. So go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, we focused on the scenario 2, purge of disloyal civil servants, and there was a lot of really good ideas about ways to just slow things down and use bureaucracy as part of that slowdown. And I'll put that whole list that we brainstormed in the chat.
Awesome, great. And I see Annie, and then I see Jane Doe. Always good to have a Jane Doe.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Annie.
Really quickly, we stayed pretty small scale. We didn't plan any actions, but people were talking. We also talked about that scenario too. There was also a lot of talking about bureaucratic slowdown, and especially pairing bureaucratic slowdown with vacation with sick time. And then also a lot of talk about like immediately expanding the circle of coworkers you're talking with about like generally legal and democratic things. And then also like some people were like, I might outright refuse an oath, in the form of very politely being like, I respect the oaths I've already taken. I am here for the Constitution and this democracy. Good day. And then everyone agreed that snitches should not exist. And so then we're going to talk about other people. And then we also talked about in the next week, just like everyone's actions are like staying in touch with people in their area and learning what days they might want to take off work to be able to be out in the streets if they're going to do that. And that sort of level of planning ahead and talking to others in their office.
Awesome. That's really great. Thank you for that.
Oh, wait.
Yeah.
And one more thing. Everyone talked about, we had actually had a good conversation toward the end about the line in the sand, right? Like, where is the line for you? And specifically how that line moves sometimes. and how that line moves in part because there's such a, really difficult to manage and very contextual balance between I'm staying on even though I hate it here because I know I can be instrumental in saving democracy, and no, it's time to go now. So just people made a commitment to sort of understanding their line, critically engaging their line, and letting it be a line when it's time.
Awesome. Thanks so much for all that. So I think Jane Doe, you're up, and then I saw a Benjamin. So go ahead, Jane Doe.
Okay, sure. And I know I have the most unimaginative anonymous name. I think a lot of what Tim is posting is great. We also talked about that same scenario and loyalty oaths and things like that. We really focused on coordinating with people because it's a lot harder to get people, if everyone is refusing, it's harder to get everyone to have to sign in, right? It's much harder if you feel like you're all alone and you might feel like you're not supported. So kind of building that coalition. And we also talked about how it's not partisan to refuse to sign, and so that's not a Hatch Act violation, because at that point someone would be elected or assumed to be elected and no longer a candidate. Having union present either in the room or on a call, but also just extending that network to ensure that you are not alone, but also across agencies. And so that's internally, and then externally also reaching out for support outside of the workplace. And we were wondering, how do we get the word out? It doesn't have to be necessarily risking your professional career to go directly and speak on CNN or whatever, but if you share information that's just public information out there that you're being asked to do this, that shouldn't be like some kind of a protected information that you wouldn't be able to share.
Awesome. Thank you very much. That's really great. Jane? Let's see. I had Benjamin. I saw Benjamin wanting to share what they came up with.
Hi. So our group was not minded to discuss specific actions and plans. So instead, we talked about the 3 scenarios in greater depth. What we kind of really focused on were three elements that we thought would be generally quite useful. The first was making use of existing workplace organizing to stand up to managers and diktats from political appointees, be they in DC or in the regional offices, and potentially drawing on union power to do that. In context where there weren't the same strong union links, we thought that we could also have simple conversations with co-workers and build small groups to amplify concerns and kind of our messaging with others, using things like coffee meetups and non-work contexts to make sure there wasn't any Hatch Act issues, because we wouldn't be on government time. We also thought it would be useful to draw on groups of really committed civil servants who already have strong ties and continue to share info and meet outside of work. Other people also were keen to pursue citizen action on their own time, be it with local groups or larger national groups. So we thought of things like Protect the Results, Indivisible, ShutDown, and other avenues.
Awesome. Thanks, Benjamin. We probably won't have time for all the groups. I do see on the stack a few more folks, so we'll see how many times we can do it. Neil, you are on the stack.
Hi, everyone. Our group had a very nice, diverse assortment of federal workers from across the spectrum. 3 points that I would bring forward is just many have been witness to leadership behaving badly, dismantling through the dismissal with short notice of Schedule A or term appointments, really as an undoing, which sadly has very little in terms of their employment protections, but possibly through documentation and making it public in some way might deter this action by others. Folks gravitated to scenario 2 as well. And I think there was a convergence around issues of where to push back when things are not technically illegal, but are political acts taken by a lame duck or in the interim period, and what you might do about it, and came in arguing, highlighting the risks, be they legal risks, political implications, or technical implications, and then a very strong advice to document just everything that's going on, so that when things happen untoward way, that there's a record that's left either for legal purpose, for investigatory purpose, or for if a new administration is going to arrive that can take over. And then from union representation, a really plea to broaden beyond the actions of unions to collectivize our actions beyond what the unions might be doing, but in concert with what individuals want to do, and to strengthen the voice where possible. And I think the first step is really connecting folks that aren't day-to-day in touch with their unions to wear that path and make that path available to them.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think we'll take one more. Does anybody, I have actually on my list, Barbara, Bob, Tara, A, some others. Does anybody have in that group something that hasn't been said yet that you really feel that should be brought into this debrief?
One thing that I don't think that has been said is one thing that came up for us is just self-care, and the fact that like this is going to be potentially devastating, and it's going to take a lot of moral and emotional fortitude to go forward. So doing what you need to do in the immediate days afterwards so that you can keep going.
That's really great. Thank you for that, Barbara. And so I think what we're going to do is the big pieces of takeaway that I heard were about organizing, whether you're doing it with your union or you're just finding another coworker, don't go it alone. Documentation on all levels as an organizing strategy, as a way to stop wrongs from happening, as a way to prevent additional things from going bad. And of course, there's always outside action, taking a leave or doing whatever you can on your own time. And so we will transition now in the last couple minutes. If we can share the slides again, we have a few more things that we'll give you to follow up with. Please do check out all the resources in the federal guide. We will be updating it. Actually, even now, there's things that we're going to update. And I want to just to point out that we've got some upcoming events. As you know, we really encourage you to check out national calendars from Protect the Results, from Choose Democracy. Strike Democracy is another group organizing. And if you're in the local DC area, you can check out the shutdowndc.org calendar. You can also text democracy to 88202 and you'll get some text information. I will say that Shutdown DC this week alone has like 15 different trainings and workshops that are all online pretty much. So you're able to join them even if you're not in DC. All right, the next slide. That would be great. And then if you want to continue to reach us, please feel free to email fedsfordemocracy@gmail.com or democracykitchen@gmail.com. We will potentially offer another workshop/meeting for federal workers. Let us know if you're interested in that. We will be emailing everyone who registered with these links, as well as a link to the slide deck. And of course, there's the link to the Federal Workers Guide. You can also use the long link that's in the chat box. Don't forget to vote. That is the last thing we really wanted to say to everybody. Please get out there and vote. And I think there's one more slide, if I remember correctly. Is that true? Is that the end? Nope. You can go back to the other one. What we're going to do is we can leave that one up. And just by way of closing out, we're going to do another chat storm, if you will. Feel free to write anything in the chat that you would like us to know, anything you're taking away, one word that you're taking away from this time we had together, or any questions that you really want us to address in further workshops. We'd love to hear it. Please do pass on the federal guide to other folks. Stay in touch by Gmail or contacting us in one way or the other through the guide. You can do it and continue to make connections at your workplaces, and remember how critical civil servants are to the functioning of this government and all the governments around the world. So thank you so much for all of you and all of you spending all the time with us and all the work that you do and will be doing in the next few weeks.
And we'll be sending out a big email with the slide deck and links and resources very shortly to everybody.
Right. And thanks for all the facilitators from Democracy Kitchen, Feds for Democracy, and ShutDown DC for hosting our big Zoom call as well. See you in the streets, if not before. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Stay safe
Thank
out
you.
there.
Stay strong, guys.
Good.
Ready to end it whenever.
Let's just wait because I want to capture some of the stuff in the chat. Oh, I forgot.
You can download the chat if you'd like.
I know. I just hate reading that. I have to say. If the facilitators want to stay on and talk for a minute, we can do that.
All right. Can I make someone else the host though? Because I've got to do homework.
Make me the host. That's fine.
I also have host privilege, so I think.
I think you're a co-host, but
Thank
Take
you,
care,
so much.
everyone. Thanks for this. Have a great night.
Thank you, Hope. Thank you for rocking.
Awesome.
Job, everybody.
That was great. So we had.
Look at your mask. How did I not see that before?
What'd you say?
I have so many masks. This is one of many. You'll see them all this weekend next, I hope.
they're
Jeff
so good.
Specifically
Yeah, so
told
we
me
had
to
a-
not wear a V for Vendetta mask. I was like, I don't have one anyway. Whew, dropping things.
I actually don't have that one, but I have like 10 others. I love masks.
So I think we had about we had over 300 people registered. I forget when the last time I looked was. And we had probably, I think maybe, did we have 160 at the high point or 150?
Yeah,
at the high
150 or so.
High 150s, yeah.
And there were a number of people who had emailed the Feds for Democracy and said, like, I can't make it. What should I do? And I said, just register anyway so you can get information. So it's possible some of those people
Oh yeah, and honestly, 50% attendance for the registration is wicked high. So.
Especially when people you can tell are super nervous about doing it.
Can I? Who's Jay, and who's David's iPhone, and who's Susan, and who? Do we know those folks? Are they core people?
Jay was in my breakout group. Jake?
Oh, that's Jake. Okay.
Jake. Okay, we got Jake. Other three though.
Susan, David.
Jeff.
We can boot. They might have walked away from their computer.
Oh yeah. Here we go. I guess I can do that since I am the person.
Jeff is Jeff Egan.